John, welcome back to the encounter. You've been here before.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Listen, as we were saying before, just between you and me, we can't really wrap it all up and say, okay, here's the finished product of whatever this thing was.
No, I was just thinking that really we need to come back in a week or 10 days and then give a kind of a preliminary gestation of what we've experienced. Also, for me, there was a kind of a curveball thrown in there at the last encounter with Father Pizzabella and Archbishop Nona, because, you're here. I've been kind of trying to, synthesize. That's the word you used, and obviously from a personal perspective, coming here from Ireland and coming to New York and all that, and seeing this thing going on and equating these things with New York outside, in my heart, in my life. And then, it's not that I've forgotten, but these guys remind me that out there are people with seriously real problems that maybe for a moment make my perception of my own problems or the problems of my society or the problems of our culture kind of quite high class, and that kind of threw me, but I think I can get my head around that in a few days. I know there is a context in this because, when you see those two guys talking, they're two men talking. It's not like a TV discussion, and I hope this isn't either, that they're two men talking.
And it's for real.
It's for real. They're two hearts engaging with their life and with their experience and sharing it, not making political points, not making ideological points, not trying to provide an analysis, and I hope we're not going to do that either. So that's the first thing that I need to kind of factor in there. The thing that stands out for me immediately is from the off as the kind of signal event of this weekend was the opening event with Christopher Wyman. I thought there's something completely emblematic of the times about this guy and his work. I hadn't heard of him before. I hadn't come across him. Shame on me.
Okay, now you have to explain what you mean by that.
Well, I picked up some of his books and I've been reading them over the last few days. Like, what he was talking about is faith in this moment, in this place. Here we are in New York, in the center of the world, the center of my world, the world that we all kind of, the Western world, whatever you call that, Western civilization. And we know that, and we will come back and, the problem of believing, the problem of skepticism, the problem of what I will kind of controversially call the implausibility of Christianity in culture that we have to deal with every day when you get up and you go out and face the world and the den of the street and the racket of the street and the blur of that. And so most of the time, I think most of the time, you're carrying doubt more than faith. If you want to speak the language of the world and of the street, you're speaking a doubt in yourself, in your own heart. I thought that was really interesting because here you have a poet, and poets are the only people who can get this. That the problem of faith is not necessarily skepticism as such. The problem is language, because we all attach our understandings of reality to words, and we put them up in front of us as explanations for who we are and what we are. And we meet the explanations of others first in their words. And poets understand that this is actually, contingent. It's a provision. Words are, as Giussani said, we use the least inadequate words. So words are not the thing. And yet, words, we have to use words. There's a poem in this, which I hope to read before we finish, a section of a poem by an Irish poet who I've been trying to sell to the world for the last, many years, Patrick Kavanagh.
You got commissions on
he is really, if Giussani had come across Kavanagh, he would have said, we don't need Leopardi and those guys. This is, it's all here.
Well, I'm not the official defensor of orthodoxy here, but be careful. I'm Italian, amongst other things, so you
I know.
Just leave Leopardi alone.
No, we
okay?
repeat. Yeah, okay. No, I know. I like Leopardi too, but I have. Patrick Kavanagh was really a mystic in Ireland in the 50s. He died quite young. He died in his early 60s, and as we know, you and I know, that's very young. But he had a brother called Peter, who was 12 years younger and who wanted to be a poet himself, but he didn't become a poet because Patrick told him you can only have one poet in any family.
Yeah, somebody got to work.
So Peter decided, well, if that is the case, and he worked here in New York. He reckoned that he had this thing that Patrick was completely ignorant, particularly of poetry. He was a genius, a great poet, great mystic, but he knew nothing about poetry. So Peter came to New York to learn about poetry, and he became a professor of poetry here in New York. And he called himself Patrick's sacred keeper. And they said that poetry is not literature, it's theology. But he gave me the most beautiful, I became friendly with Peter, he lived into his 90s, and the most beautiful definition of a poem I ever heard, because they used to talk about the flash of the other coming in. And I said to Peter one night, where did the words come into this? What are the words? And he said, in a poem, the words are the least important part. He says, in a poem, the words burn up in a tremendous thread of something unusual. And that's what Wyman really understands, that he's dealing with words, but he's actually talking about something beyond. And that's the only way we can get out of the blocks that our culture is imposing on our belief, the skepticism that it's imposing on us, because we import all these words and we try to order them in our heads and order them around us so that we understand the world in a verbal way. And we need to do that, but it's also a huge problem. Wyman understands that. I thought he was incredible, but also he was incredible at the level of the doubter, that he belonged more with doubters, because I'm a doubter. That's probably more controversial than the Leopardi quote. But I'm not a doubter. I don't say this didn't happen, that didn't happen. I'm not that kind of doubter. I'm somebody who's full of doubt every day, and who, at the same time, is convinced in another way by the evidence of my own existence. Yeah,
but hold on a second. We focused on fear.
Yeah.
In many ways.
Yes.
Now you're bringing up doubt. Is it the same thing? Is it different?
Yeah, it is. And I want to read you, if I can find it, the piece which, this paragraph, which I found in this amazing book. If the bookstore is still open, buy this book, My Bright Abyss. It's a meditation of a modern believer by Christian Wyman. And he's describing his sickness and what happens as a result of the sickness. Last night, my wife and I finally fell asleep after talking and crying about our life together and the life of our children. The splendor of some moments, so many moments, the gift we have been given, and then the misery of my sickness and the way it is crushing us, the terror the two of us feel at what will happen if, I won't write when, we are now always thinking it, if I die. I wake in the night with a terror that is purer, further than my own. My suffering is the key, but not the content. And for an hour I am silvered with an icy infinite distance, an abyss of pure meaninglessness, of which I am merely some small and dreadfully sentient particle. I am not dreaming. I have never been more fully awake. A spot of time, and what that spot shows this time is nothingness, suffering without meaning. This is fear becoming doubt, doubt becoming fear. And we have to be, where I grew up in Ireland, you're not allowed to express doubts. I mean, Doubting Thomas was a villain. He was a bad guy. He had the mustache, those guys in the movies. He was up there with Judas. Judas was slightly worse, but not a lot. I kind of always had a sneaking regard for Doubting Thomas, because I thought, well, he just asked for some evidence. Is that so wrong? I kind of think if I'd been there, I would have been doing the same thing. And I don't mean that in any way, I hope, blasphemous, but I just think that that's a good thing. And without Doubting Thomas, we wouldn't know as certainly as we do about these things. We know more certainly what happened because of Thomas. So I think that kind of Thomas is almost like the patron saint of the modern era, because we are all doubters, we're all skeptics. Because how could you be otherwise in the world that doesn't acknowledge these things?
True. Let me interrupt you, though. Then you come over here, you, myself, the thousands of people who've been with us over this weekend, and I guess inside us, doubt and fear do exist. Yet, you look around you and you see gladness.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Oh, it's amazing because, you might think, and the world out there would think, that this is a kind of a group huddle of, mutual reassurance. But that's not what it's like. I mean, I think of New York as the center of the world. It's a place that is mythical. It was built by my ancestors, your ancestors. And we don't know how they did it. It's like, I look at all those buildings, those tall buildings, and I kind of think they're kind of like blunted steeples on the one hand, but they're also kind of stunted towers of Babel. Somewhere in between, there's that kind of desire for the infinite and still the kind of desire to make man the center of the world. And this is the place where if you can sort of live it here, you can live it anywhere. So this is a great place. This is where the test is. This is kind of Cape Canaveral or whatever you call it. So I came early. This is the first year I've come to the encounter that I actually had some time to do other than come from the airport, talk, and then go back again. And myself and Rita, my wife, we went up around. We were vagabonding around Manhattan on Friday all day and giving thanks for everything, giving thanks particularly for climate change because it was such a beautiful day.
It's beautiful now because it's snowing.
I know you prefer it the way it was.
Yeah.
You're a traditionalist. I can't.
So fearing gladness.
I came here with the mentality I come here with is the mentality that I feel most of the time, and I would call it a kind of inversion. It's almost like looking, that when you look into the wrong end of the telescope, you see things upside down. That's the way it is most of the time in the world, because you think that faith, religion, all these contemporary, whatever word you want to use, is a small part of reality, and that the reality is the big thing is something else. It's the secular world. It's the kind of irreligious world. And here, in this building, in the last 3 days, I kind of was able to turn it upside down again, to look into the right side of the telescope again. Not, as I say, as a kind of a group reassurance, but because of the way things were being talked about, and looking into the eyes of people like Kristen Wyman and Father Pizzaballa and all these people who hold this certainty and can articulate it so beautifully. And that gives me affirmation from my heart, because the big problem in the modern world, I think, is that we all have this thing going on in our heart, all the questions, but the din of the outside world, it drowns it out for us. Even we can't hear it. Even this short distance, we can't hear what's going on in our heart. And so it's really important that we get this kind of circuitry going with other hearts, which is what happens here. And you think, no, I see things now again. I'm reminded. And I mean, that's what I think Christian was saying about, that the faith is really keeping true to the moments of faith in your own life. That's very often the best you can do. Going back, I remember when I believed very strongly. I remember the moment when I was certain. Because a lot of the time I have to, and Giussani is really beautifully helpful in this, because he kind of almost like, I think of, in some ways, Giussani is almost like a mathematician. He gives you all the evidences, and you can sort of, or all the access to the evidence, the method to put the evidences together. And it's almost like an algebraic, the way I put it, it's almost like an algebraic equation. There's my desire, there is the witness, there is the correspondence that I feel, the unanswered questions which I feel the very fact that I'm here is something that I'm liable to forget out there or back in Ireland. You know, they're very fast. People say to me, come on, my colleagues, my former colleagues, I'm no longer a journalist, I gave it up, not unrelated to all this. And you know, sometimes my colleague says, come on, you're an intelligent guy. You know the way I always say that to you? You're an intelligent guy. They don't really, you know, how can you really believe that the Son of God came here, you know, 2,000 years ago and died on the cross? And I say, yeah. And thanks to Giussani, I have the answer. I say, yeah, it is a bit improbable, I guess. But, you know, it's not nearly as improbable as the fact that I came myself, that I'm here now. I'm here in this world. I'm here right now, looking out at this world, asking what the hell's going on.
So, sticking to that.
And this is why it's so important to be here and to see something that engages with the world totally, not in a religious way, in the way that we kind of have been told that small part of the world is religious.
But what if this is a dream, and then tomorrow we go back to our daily life, and doubt and fear
that is the real
plug
danger,
us up,
that it wears off, and that we, you know, that's no good. Then, you know, we have to hold on to it when we go back, and that's a really hard thing to do. But the memory of all this is going to help, provided you keep going. You remember how you saw the world for these days. You remembered how other people looked at you and talked to you and took for granted that the things that are dear to you are dear to them and are true and real. You know, I think that's what we have to work on and renew. That's the point of the community of faith. We can't do it on our own. We will lose it if we try to do it on our own.
You make me think of, and I've never been much of a believer, to make a long story short, I owe you to Father Giussani. And one of the first things that I learned from Father Giussani was this strange definition of faith, which it was strange for me, recognition of a presence, you know, which is not exactly what my answer would have been to a question like, what is faith? You know, as a teenager, I had no idea. Well, if I think about this and I try to connect to your point about memory that you just brought up, tomorrow, the experience of faith would be the memory of something that we have seen and touched and experienced, something present.
Yeah.
Not a feeling or...
Well, you know, I'm thinking of Tom Jones and that talk he gave, and that it resonates with previous things I've heard speak. Buzz Aldrin, you know, John Glenn, Neil Armstrong. There's a very strange kind of paradox about the way the world sees these guys, these adventurers, as opposed to the way they see themselves and the way they see the world. And I've noticed this again and again. You know, we in the modern secular world, we watch this stuff on TV, and something about it tells us, hey, we're in charge. Man is moving through the stratosphere. We're taking over everything. Who needs God? There's nothing. It's obvious. We're in charge. We've now become all... You know, this happened to me one night, actually. I was giving a talk about Patrick Kavanagh. I'm talking about the mysticism of Patrick Kavanagh. And at the end, there were some questions. And this guy stood up and said, hey, come on. We're sick and tired of listening to all this stuff. He said, I came here for a talk about Patrick Kavanagh. I didn't want to lecture on Catholicism. And he says, don't you realize that man has been to the moon? I thought, wow. That's a hard one. And, you know, thanks to Giussani, I had the answer, I think, came out. Because it was like, my father would have called this a smart answer, by which in Ireland we mean, I don't know if you'd use that expression here, it doesn't mean that you're smart, it means you're a smart aleck, a smart answer. And so I immediately, it popped out. I said, have you been to the moon? And it turned out that he hadn't, luckily. And I said, well, how has it changed your life? How has it changed your heart that Neil Armstrong went to the moon and walked on the moon? How does that change? Because when Neil Armstrong came back, he looked and he got up and he had to go to bed and sleep. And then he got up in the morning and he looked in the bathroom mirror, I presume, and he still saw the same face and he had the same question. Who is Neil Armstrong? Why? So nothing has changed but the progress. And this is the thing about people like Tom Jones. You can see their faith is really strong. And yet down here, we take their adventuring as evidence for our complacency and our skepticism and our sense of hubris. And that's a really interesting contradiction, that the guys who actually do the work and take the risks, although I actually are not like that. I met Tom Jones actually, he was in the same hotel as me. And I met, we came out of our bedroom this morning and there he was waiting for the elevator. Like astronauts have to use elevators.
I guess.
Who knew that? You'd think they'd be kind of, So I kind of, on the way down, I asked him a few questions. I asked him about the fear thing. We gave a really interesting, I said, were you never afraid up there? I said,
on the elevator?
Yeah. Well, he said, I was afraid that we would do something that we hadn't prepared properly. That was kind of, I thought, kind of a bland answer. But I said, really, up there, did you ever think this is a crazy thing to be doing? And he said, no. He said, it's what I always wanted. It's what I always longed for. Why would I be afraid? I said, that's the right answer.
That's the key.
That's the right answer, isn't it? I also told him my Tom Jones joke. Is Tom Jones, do you know the other Tom Jones? Do people in America know who Tom Jones really is? I mean,
the real one, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say to Tom, I would call myself Thomas if I was you, just to, because it's like being called Johnny Cash or something. Yeah. But so I said, so I told him my Tom Jones joke, which I'll tell you. This guy goes to the doctor, right? And he says, doctor, I don't know what's wrong with me. I keep singing the green, green grass of home. By the way, if you don't get the joke, it's because you're Americans. It's not, this joke was actually voted the best joke ever by the readers of the Daily Telegraph in London.
Yeah, but that's a different world.
My wife Rita thinks it's the worst joke she's ever heard, but she doesn't read the Daily Telegraph, right? So, doctor, I don't know what's wrong with me. I keep singing the green, green grass of home. And he says, yeah, that's Tom Jones syndrome. And he said, oh, is that common? Well, it's not unusual. So Tom, the other Tom said to me, I didn't see that coming. So, yeah, these guys, isn't that an amazing paradox, though, that we take some kind of sustenance for our skepticism, our hubris, and they just feel the wonder and astonishment of looking at God's universe from up there. Like, we should really think about this stuff. Because we're in our warm, centrally heated rooms. Pope Benedict talked about the bunker that man built for himself so that he can shut out the mystery. We're here watching them on TV and thinking, there you go. Man has been to the moon. And they're thinking, God is.
Well, which is like being in front of the sea and having to make up your mind and decide, shall I sail or shall I stay? Which is, I believe, a daily challenge. Is not one thing that you decide once in a lifetime and that's about it. You take the boat, you don't take the boat. The boat is safe in the harbor, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's not meant to stay there. I'm not meant to stay there. But what allows me to take that step?
Faith that you can find, that's what you have to construct. That's the antidote to fear, is faith. To know, and it's like, I again loved that if I can remember correctly, what Christian said on Friday night, that faith is, I can't remember exactly how he put it, but it's like, it's to risk believing, to risk, thinking it'll be okay. Imagine that, to risk thinking everything will be okay. What a risk that would be. Like, skepticism is really a crippling thing, and it's fear, and it brings fear along with it. Let me tell you a story, which I've told before, but it just shows, again, how Gisani kind of helped me in ways. When my daughter is kind of grown up, she's now 20, and she's in Trinity and in Dublin, and she always kind of had amazing insights into this whole thing, like about God, and she had no difficulty in comprehending, the place of God in her life and all that. But when she got to be 13, I remember one day very clearly when she was 13, we were out in Spain, and we were with my two nephews, and they're kind of older and they're more typical young Irish Catholics, which means they believe in absolutely nothing. And so they were kind of laying it on thick, and I wasn't really getting involved. But that night, Roisin tapped on my bedroom door and she said, Dad, I'm terrified. I'm terrified that there's nothing. And that's a really heavy moment. You know it's going to come, but you never prepare. And it comes, and suddenly and you know that if you utter a platitude, it's over. If you say, there, it'll be okay, forget it, finished. Luckily, I had encountered Giussani, and I had read The Religious Sense. And I remembered, to me, the most important, I always say, slightly, again, another heresy, 70% of Giussani is page 100 of The Religious Sense, that paragraph about, imagine you've just been born. Imagine you're coming out of your mother's womb at this moment. And I kind of said, so I said to Roisin, okay, go back to the day you were born. I didn't quite give her the Giussani version because I kind of thought that was a bit glib or something, pat for me to come out with. So I said, go back to the day you're being born. And don't stop there. Go back another 9 months to the day, that was the 10th of March, 1996. Go back 9 months more, let's say to the 10th of June, 1995. That's the day you were conceived, say. But don't stop there. Go back one more day, before you were conceived, before you were anything, before you could even, be thought about by anybody. And you can bring with you all, as Giussani says, bring everything you've learned, bring all your experience, all your language, all your emotions, everything you have to that moment. And I want to ask you a question. I want to ask you, what in that moment do you think is possible? And I said, is Spain possible? Is the Mediterranean possible? Am I possible? Are you possible? Is anything possible? And she said, no, nothing's possible. In that moment, nothing's possible. So I said, why then? You're here in the midst of everything, in Spain. The Mediterranean is there. I'm here, you're here. You have your life. Everything is here. And you're thinking about nothingness. You're afraid of nothing. You're afraid of the abyss. You're afraid of something that somebody has told you is going to happen to you. Why? I mean, what kind of reason is it to be in the midst of everything and be thinking of nothing? That's where the fear comes from. That as Giussani says, the fear of losing what we have cripples us and stops us living in it. And I said, that's not reasonable. And I mean, I'm so grateful to Giussani for that alone. If it was nothing else, I would be ahead with Giussani. Because Roisin now, and I don't mean this as any kind, she's studying theology in Trinity College. So far, she's kind of on the road. She still understands in her own way what this is about. Fear, fear is such a waste of time. I mean, I'm an alcoholic, and I haven't had a drink for 25 years, through the grace of God. And the symptom, alcoholism is a symptom, is a disease of modernity. A lot of these addictions are fundamentally that, because they're based on fear. The fear of having taken over from God, having usurped the role of God, having banished God. And once you banish God, you have to take his place on the throne. But the problem with being on the throne, on God's throne, is that you have all the responsibilities in your own life, but none of the power. And you're screwed. And that's kind of what I had to learn to stop drinking, was to actually allow God back in to do the stuff that he used to do. So I resigned as CEO of John Waters Incorporated, and I invited God back from retirement, and he took over. and things have been going swimmingly ever since, as you can see.
Well, you told the story, and I was tempted of telling the story myself, but I'm not sure I'm going to tell the story. But
Sure.
I know for a fact that every time I didn't stop at the level of fear, every time I took that step, I went beyond the threshold of what would have been under my control, has always been because of another. But somebody real, not... Well, I'll tell you the story as briefly as I can.
Yeah.
I'm 61 years old, so I belong to a generation, European generation, and, we were all ideologically Marxists, even though we didn't know what that meant, but that was what was supposed to be. So, among other things, I was a fierce enemy of communal liberation, okay, as a teenager. At some point, curiosity and desire and sadness, I would say also, compelled me to try to take a step. And since I've always been fairly wild, I decided that I wanted to go to Milan to see Father Giussani, okay? So I'm going to take the boat. I'm going to go to Milan. For a kid who was born and raised in a small beach town like Pesaro 40 plus years ago, that was a big step. And I went. I went because of a need. I needed, and I could even understand that I needed a father. Maybe I did not understand what a father is, but I understood that I needed a father. Somebody who could take me by the hand and help me understand my heart and live my life. And I didn't know where to look, but at least I was curious enough to take the train, not the boat, and go to Milan. You don't go to Milan by boat. That was the promise, the desire and the promise. After 10 days in Milan, I wanted to go back. So I was ready to bring my boat back to the harbor, because at least I knew my harbor. Instead, I was in unknown territory and surrounded by unfamiliar faces and at times hostile feelings. But then something happened, because what makes a difference is something that happens, not something, and that you are forced to acknowledge, not something that you make happen.
Yeah.
I didn't make happen a damn thing. I was sitting in a classroom, hiding behind a newspaper, and I was thinking about going back home for real, meaning my hometown, when a throng of people storms into the room, and next thing I remember, there's an old man, he was only 52 by then, but it looked old to me,
Young man.
because I was young, sitting next to me, and he goes, "And what are you doing here all by yourself?" That was my first close encounter with Father Giussani. And I have a vague recollection of how that conversation went. But it's like saying, I'm on this boat, I don't know where to go. Somebody's taking the helm, somebody who mysteriously cares for me, loves me for what I am, doesn't measure me according to my pettiness or weaknesses or, long list for me, probably as long for you, embraces me and tells me, be not afraid. the promise becomes real for me. It's always happened like that. Even here, this weekend, the promise becomes real in the flesh. I wouldn't know how else to put it, okay? This is way bigger. This is way more beautiful. This is way more mine than anything I could possibly create. And if you allow me, then I'll leave you the final 6 minutes, and then I got to thank everybody. I want to read this thing from Father Giussani. A miracle, because for me, this is a miracle. A miracle is a human reality lived out daily, without emphasis on the exceptional, without any need for exceptions, without any particularly good fortune. It is the reality of eating, drinking, waking and sleeping, invested by the awareness of a presence that exists in hands touching, in faces which can be seen, in a pardon which can be given, in money to be shared, in a burden to bear, in a task to be accepted. What do you think?
Yeah. The thing about Giussani, the first thing I started to notice about him was that he didn't let anything go. You know, he insisted that everything was significant. Everything. And the world had taught me something different. Even though I had an experience that somehow confirmed what he was saying, I still was convinced that these were kind of coincidences or something. Giussani kept saying things like, telling me that follow reality. I didn't know what that meant at first, but gradually I got. So he's saying to me that the things that happen to me today are significant. They're not incidental. They're not accidental. The thing about that beautiful, again, the opening on Friday night, that passage about the Chopin piece. I mean, that's incredible to describe so beautifully something that everybody might miss, you know, to capture and to admit that he missed it himself for so long.
As the actress, the reader said after the presentation Friday evening, I've never read anything like this.
Yeah, and that's like, what, you know, like, who is this guy? How did he kind of see through all this stuff? And so the faith grows in understanding this mind, because he's in your head. Because so many of the things that Giussani has said, you've kind of half taught yourself. But maybe you've dismissed them. Maybe you've kind of said, oh, that's... And then he puts it all together. And I really think that, though, the challenge for us now, in the next period, is to, you know, Christian said about speaking to non-believers, that's kind of where he belongs. And I as a former journalist, I kind of used to get into lots of wars with non-believers, you know, like atheists. I used to be an atheist myself, but I still used to get into wars, or they used to get into wars with me. And I kind of wish I could get out of that. That's partly why I'm not writing anymore, because I realized that I got into a certain rut of defending things. That's the wrong way. Albacete used to have a beautiful way. I don't know how he did it, but he used to be able to say things and not fall out with anybody. Everybody loved him because of the way he was, not because they agreed with him. You know, people writing the New York Times in the really going across enemy lines, as it were, and he didn't behave like that. I think we need to find a way to create a language that will jump the gap. And that's what I really picked up from Christian on Friday night. That, you know, a great poet. Again, I didn't think that we'd ever see another Kavanagh at this stage. You know, 50 years later, it didn't seem possible, but there he was. There he is. And we need to, because, you know, what we actually say, this is the point I was making earlier, what we say is not necessarily what we believe, what we feel. And I've had I'll give you an example of this, a brief story. There was this journalist that I was always at war with in Ireland. And I got on personally with him quite well, but professionally, in public, we were always having to be pulled apart. And then the time I went to Rome to speak alongside Pope Francis in 2013, I went on the radio in Ireland and talked about it afterwards. And that night he rang me and said, I heard you on the radio. And I thought he was going to have a go at me. And he said, no, I was listening with my wife who has cancer. And some of the things you were saying really meant a lot to both of us. And I just wanted to say that. He said, I don't believe any of that stuff, by the way. He says, I don't believe anybody who tells me that they know for sure that God exists. But neither do I believe those guys who say they're sure he doesn't exist either. I just don't have any time for any of it. But still, I just wanted to say that to you. So I said, thanks. So we had a bit of a conversation. And then about a month later, he rang me again and said, I'm doing a TV program about the state of the church in Ireland. Would you come on it? And I, buoyed up and encouraged by our newfound friendship and, understanding, mutual understanding. I said, yeah, sure. So I went on, and he asked me a question about Catholicism, and I started to go into a kind of a, Justinian stream of consciousness or something, and he said, no, he says, cut that stuff. He says, I don't want to hear any of that stuff. He says, just tell me about clerical child abuse. I want to talk to you about church. I said, I'm bored of that. I don't want to talk about that. So next thing, we're having to be dug out of each other again on air. And so at the end of the show, it didn't get any better. And then at the end of the show, I was sitting there and I taking off my mic, and I saw him up there. I didn't know what to say. I was going to say to him, but I heard somebody else ask him about his wife, and I said, I better ask him about his wife. So I went up to when everybody had gone off. I said, is your wife okay? How is she doing? And she said, no, she's much better. Yeah, good, yeah. So we kind of thawed out and started to talk. And again, he kind of repeated all that. He said, yeah, you're really good defending your corner and all that. I said, thanks. Someday you might say that on air. But we kind of, one of those conversations, where you start here and you get to there in about 3 hours' time. We kept walking and stopping and walking, stopping. And he kept repeating, I don't believe any of that stuff. He says, I don't believe anybody can tell me God exists, but I don't believe those who tell me he doesn't either. I just don't have any time for that. And but then he put his hand in his pocket and he said, but and he took out a rosary beads. And he says, I've had that in my pocket for the last 6 months. I don't know why. And that really got into me. How many other people are out there who are on the TV all the time saying certain things, but their heart is saying something else. And they have no way of being liberated. Because, with the best will, you kind of, we're the ones who should be liberating them, but we're kind of attacking them, or they think we are. That we have to find a way of actually talking to them. I'm talking about me. When I say we, I mean I have to find a way of not, treating them like they're my enemy. That's really important. And a language that kind of affirms the heart, the longing of the heart, without trying to prove anything, without trying to kind of win the argument, but just talks the experience that we have openly and truthfully, and trusts it to be heard in the same spirit. Sometimes it won't. We can't expect it. We have no, guarantee that it's going to be listened to in that way. But if we don't do it, we know it won't. And that's for me is a challenge now. For me, I know I've been doing it wrong. I think of Albacete and I think, that was his great gift, to be loved. That's there's nothing better.
That's right.
So I wonder, before we finish, I want to read this poem, this short from Patrick Kavanagh.
Okay.
Are we nearly finished? I don't want to finish before we should. This is from a Canal Bank Walk. Patrick Kavanagh, when he was 50, he had cancer. He developed cancer, and then he wrote a series called the Canal Poems, which he realized that everything he'd thought before that was kind of wrong. And he realized the most important thing in life was what he called not caring what people thought. Say what's in your heart. Don't care what people think. So, and this is really about, you know, what I'm talking about, words and the limits of words and the limits of arguments. O unworn world, enrapture me, encapture me in a web of fabulous grass and eternal voices by a beach. Feed the gaping need of my senses. Give me ad lib to pray unself-consciously with overflowing speech. For this soul needs to be honored with a new dress woven from green and blue things and arguments that cannot be proven.
Thank you, John. We've been given a treasure over this weekend, you know, talent, whatever you want to call it, a big gift. On day one, I told the volunteers, you know, by the way, we had about 350 people who made this thing possible, who live with gratitude, gladness, and sacrifice, which is a beautiful word, even though oftentimes it scares us. If we only remembered the true meaning, which is sacrum facere, making things sacred, well, that maybe would have a different impact on us. But this has been an experience of gratitude, gladness, and sacrifice. Now, memory has to become the protagonist. I remember another conversation with Father Giussani in which somebody, thinking of the hard times to come, like tomorrow, which is another day, and the encounter is gone, and we go back to our daily life, you know, somebody was saying, yeah, the problem is holding up. And Giussani, who was a very intense human being, slammed his fist on the table like this and went, no, the problem is not holding up. The problem is the vividness of the origin. The problem is to keep the memory of the miracle that we experienced in the flesh. We can find the words. We use lots of words here. Testimonies, poetry, even notes are like words. And yet, the most striking and visible thing was human faces, wasn't it? This is a promise. It calls for gratitude, gladness, and sacrifice, so that memory can keep building our life and the world around us. That's how I want to live. That's how I want to sail. And if you believe that the encounter can help us live like this and keep the memory of the miracle that we are, well, help us stay alive. There are many ways to help us, from the tear down tonight to money, which is not the most beautiful thing in the world, but it's part of reality. In fact, you know, it was listed amongst the things here. It is the reality of eating, drinking, waking, as you were saying, you know, things which would appear to be banal, and instead they carry everything. The most striking thing for me, when I really met the companionship that generates this encounter, was that everything was embraced, everything was valuable, everything carried within the infinite somehow. There were children, there were parents, grandparents, rich and poor. It's the whole world. It's the whole creation. Thank you, everybody. John particularly. There's Father Peter here, but I don't know if there are other speakers here, the volunteers. Thanks a lot. What is left is that the exhibits will remain open, but probably John can say it better than me. Thank you.